Welcome back to Startup Health Now, the podcast where we celebrate the entrepreneurs and innovators who are transforming health. I'm Logan Plaster. Sami Inkinen has about as good of a founder pedigree as you could ever hope for. With his current company, Virta, Inkinen boasts 9-figure revenue and has successfully raised $360 million in outside capital. This is his second company with a billion-plus valuation, having already built and sold Trulia, the internet marketplace that helped revolutionize real estate. Did I mention he's an elite Ironman athlete and a world record holder? It's an impressive list any way you slice it, but Sami doesn't seem to get hung up on it.
It's nice for marketing. It's like if I speak to a bunch of entrepreneurs, it's nice to say, hey, guess what? I founded 2 unicorns and one actually went public and actually sold for billions of dollars. It brings sort of BS credibility. So they're nice titles, but at the end of the day, it's all BS.
Instead, he's laser focused on his company's Health Moonshot mission, which is to reverse type 2 diabetes in 100 million people through a program that combines nutrition and telemedicine.
We deliver Ozempic-like results without the drug and without the cost and without the side effects.
Virta Health is one of the great success stories in health tech today and in the startup health community, so we wanted to pull Sami in for a masterclass. In this episode, which is an excerpt from our wide-ranging hour-long conversation, Sami talks about everything from the biggest surprise he faced as a health tech founder to how he finds balance between his identity as a CEO and that of being a father and a husband. He explains how he structures rhythms of strategic planning, and he talks about the existential crisis he faced after selling Trulia and how that experience continues to shape his view of work. Let's get into the conversation. Sami, first of all, thank you for taking the time with us. Good to see you again. It's been a couple years since our last chat.
Thanks so much, Logan. Excited to be here.
I want to start with your CV because you have this impressive track record with these billboard moments. I mentioned Trulia, a world record, an Ironman. And yet, of course, those are just these signposts in what is a much more complex life. And so because we're going to talk a little bit about being a CEO and a bit about the identity of being a founder, I wanted to ask you the question of how do you like to be introduced, given all these things, which is sort of another way of saying like how you want to be known in the world, given your accomplishments.
Yeah, I mean, all those kind of label, it's all bullshit. It's nice for marketing. It's like if I speak to a bunch of entrepreneurs, it's nice to say, hey, guess what? I founded 2 unicorns and one actually went public and actually sold for billions of dollars. It brings sort of BS credibility. So they're nice titles, but at the end of the day, it's all BS. I don't know how philosophical you want me to get, but I'm just another human being trying to get through my life and make my day and try to make most out of life. And being a human is very hard. It's very hard. I often say like dogs have it so well. They just have fun all the time. They either sleep or eat or make babies. And they're just having the best time all the time. But being a human is freaking hard.
I appreciate that. I think that is good context for the folks on this call to remember, because what you achieved with, 2 unicorns, with what you say are marketing slogans, are things that people, strive to attain, and they have to, hearing it from you helps keep that in context, I believe.
If you start believing in your own success based on press headlines or others, it's a very dangerous place to be, I think, mentally, emotionally, and then also it's usually the beginning of the downfall. Objectively, you don't know where you end up, but the one thing you know is that the work that you do every day, and if you enjoy that and you enjoy the process of improving, creating, everything's going to be fine. But you really don't know where you end up. And statistically, as a founder entrepreneur, statistically, the most likely outcome is a failure. So you better enjoy the process.
So there's a lot of different ways we could take this conversation, and I wish we had, even more time, because I know that we could go deep on a lot of things. We will talk about leadership. We'll talk about go-to-market strategy, some of the stuff you learned about personal well-being, but we're also talking to an audience that deeply cares about healthcare and about type 2 diabetes. So I actually want to start with Virta and have you give us a pullback and tell us about the work that you're doing with Virta today. What are your biggest priorities? What are maybe some of the challenges you're looking at?
We think we are trying to solve, not just trying, but solving the biggest health epidemic of our generation, which is metabolic health and specifically type 2 diabetes and obesity. which is now sadly affecting more than half of American adults. So that's 150 million plus American adults. And we like to say these days, because everyone has heard the word Ozempic, that we deliver Ozempic-like results without the drug and without the cost and without the side effects. And we do it through nutrition and telemedicine. So that's what we do as a company. In terms of maybe briefly where we are, so I started working on Virta August 2014, actually when we stepped off the rowboat in Hawaii. So that was kind of like when I personally went full time, and then a year later, I had employees and outside capital. So sort of 9 to 10 years quietly working. First 3 years was in a clinical trial mode, and then we started commercialization in 2018. So that's a little bit of a history. And where we are as a company now, about 500 employees. You could think of us about, not official numbers, but like 100 million, nine-figure revenue scale. So it's a real business. We raised 360 million of outside capital. Still more than 100 million is in the bank, so we're in a good place. So the advertising slogan could be like a pre-IPO company, and objectively, that's kind of where we are. What we are focused on is really execution right now. So the business plan that we had early, which I always try to simplify things, which is kind of one of my lessons, would be like everything that looks easy gets very complicated when you start building a company, launching a product. So I try to keep it very simple. So we had sort of step 1, clinical trial and test the product. Step 2, particularly in healthcare context, difficult, test and prove, go to market, the business model. And then now we're in this, what I call step 3, that is scale a great business and make it profitable. So we're in this, it's kind of a scaling mode, which is both simple and very hard. So we're just trying to repeat what we do very, very well by scaling, which honestly, with a tech and people and doctors and patients and AI, it's not that trivial. So huge focus on execution and scaling right now.
Thinking about the clinical validation piece, I know you really started there with the reversal, but then you just mentioned the Ozempic-like results without the drugs. Where are we at in terms of the clinical validation of that kind of a promise? Because that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. Well, I would, sometimes people say science proves, which is funny because science doesn't really prove anything. So in terms of clinical validation, you're never done. It's like bricks in a wall, and you should always be layering more and more bricks. So, but obviously, I'm a little biased inside the company, but I would say it's irrefutably proven, in our opinion, that we can systematically reverse type 2 diabetes, so at least substantially improve. It's irrefutably proven that we can systematically help people lose 13% of their body weight without drugs and maintain that. And I say that because of our 5-year prospective clinical trial, about a dozen peer-reviewed papers, and now more than 100,000 people have benefited from Virta in the quote-unquote real world. So the evidence base is pretty strong, I would say. But again, like science never proves. It's just like there's more and more evidence that then eventually, hopefully, creates a paradigm shift, and people say like, wait a second, why did we not think that type 2 diabetes is reversible, particularly nutritionally? Why did we think it's a progressive chronic disease where the best we can do is more drugs and eventually DaVita is making millions in dialysis? Why did we not believe that that's not inevitable? But that kind of paradigm shift usually happens a decade or decades after the initial evidence is very clear that, hey, this is not the best way we can do something. So why do I say all that? Like the attitude we have internally is nothing's ever enough. We need to prove our clinical and economic value and outcomes between now and forever. And the more we do, the better it is.
What's your biggest surprise about where you are today, given the kind of projections that you may have made in those early couple of years for Virta?
What's the biggest? Well, as a founder, I shouldn't say this, but I will say that the fact that we are here and we exist 9 years later and have like we're not going to go away. Like we've survived, we've gotten over the first hump. And now the question is, are we going to climb to the top of Mount Tamalpais in San Francisco or to top of Mount Everest? So that is a miracle, and honestly, statistically, it's a miracle. But to give more specifics, I think commercialization and go-to-market in a B2B2C context in US healthcare, so commercialization and go-to-market wasn't just hard, it was ridiculously hard and complicated. So that would be one, I would say. And then the second thing I will say is, so I come from outside of healthcare, so physicist by training, and previous company was, an internet website, basically real estate marketplace. What was surprising to me was that convincing even scientists, in particular clinicians like primary care doctors, about the outcomes and the magnitude of our results happens faster and easier through one patient in the panel of 2,000. So anecdote, N equals 1, than hundreds of pages of peer-reviewed papers. Which I literally thought, like, once we have like 2 or 3 peer-reviewed papers, prospective control trial, it's like everyone's going to be like, wow, this is amazing. This is the future of diabetes care, obesity. No. Almost nothing happened. But you have one patient out of a panel of 2,000 in a primary care doctor's office, and the patient comes back and says, hey, I've had diabetes for 20 years. I'm off of insulin. My blood sugar is down. And the provider goes, this is unbelievable. I've never seen this. Like, what's the company? What's the treatment again? I want to send all my patients there. So that's kind of been surprising, which anyone who's kind of understands human psychology and how to change your mind kind of thing probably isn't surprised. But for me, it was like, wow, that's crazy.
It makes intuitive sense, and yet it's still shocking at the same time, right? It does. And what a powerful statement in terms of, all the founders on this call thinking about how to share the sort of the magic of what they're working on.
Yeah, and obviously it's not either or. Like you want to have both. You want to have we have beautiful anecdotes. I have this Virta logo T-shirt. We have a bunch of patients who permanently tattooed the logo of the company, this spark, in their bodies after we reverse the diabetes, which is phenomenal. So those kinds of anecdotes are very, very helpful. But at the same time, when you operate in healthcare, particularly in healthcare, like, yes, don't forget the trials and studies and peer-reviewed papers. Like, you want all of it for maximum impact.
What makes a product so good that one of your users would want to get a tattoo of your logo on their body?
No, it is a good question. There are not that many brands, but if there's like Harley Davidson. You mentioned Ironman. Those of you who've done triathlons, I don't have one, but people have, at least used to have, like in their calves, like, oh, they did an Ironman event, they took a tattoo on their calf, kind of stuff. I think it's the emotion. We're humans. Like you have to have an emotional experience that goes way beyond your everyday, every week life. So that's what you need to. I don't think there's anything intellectual about it, because it's crazy. Why would you take a for-profit company logo as a tattoo unless you're a founder? And by the way, I don't have my own company's logo. It has to be an emotional. Harley Davidson. Why you buy a motorcycle? Why do you take a tattoo of? It's crazy. Yeah. People have those. I think it has to be an emotional experience.
It's pretty interesting, Sami, because you just said how powerful emotional experiences are for the physician to understand the power of the therapy. And now you're talking about the emotional impact on the patient itself. So the whole journey, incredibly impacted by the emotional impact that you convey. What's your philosophy on how a CEO needs to think about staying flexible throughout their journey? I don't know how much you look back and feel like you've pivoted, Virta evolved, changed, however you want to, describe it. How obsessive should a founder be about their vision, and how flexible and open should they be? What are just some of your philosophical thoughts on how to know when to bend?
Pretty much everything you have to do as a founder is like, it's paradoxes. But when you listen to podcasts, they never talk about the nuance of paradox. It's always like, are you a wartime CEO or peacetime CEO? Are you an Elon tough guy or like a nice this or that? It's all like paradoxes. Like, that's a real world. It's like driving a car. It's not like you only turn the steering wheel to the left. Like, yeah, you have to turn it to the right when the road's going to the right. So it's kind of like paradoxes. So what do I mean by that? I keep repeating this to my team, that one of the hardest things for me as a founder type is to not engineer crisis when no crisis is needed. Like I'm always like, when things are working, I'm like, okay, what new can we launch? What can we break? And obviously you when things are going well, you actually want to engineer urgency. Like you do want to have a sense of urgency constantly. But one of the hardest things for me is to say, and I also repeat this internally, is that most successful companies do the following. They do one thing very well. So like a product or service, product market fit, like truly amazing results. And then they repeat it a million times over. Which is to say that when you find something that's working, bite your tongue, handcuff as a founder, your hands, arms behind your back, and just focus on executing and repeating that one thing a million times over. So that's an example of a paradox. Like if you have something that's working, don't mess it up. Like focus on hiring the right kinds of people who can execute, eliminating distractions, and just kind of executing. Now, you may have a situation where like you're just getting the spider sense that, yeah, we're kind of growing, but maybe we're engineering growth by spending too much money on growth. Like maybe the product market fit isn't there, or maybe there's something in the horizon. Like when we saw the GLP-1 drugs come in, it's like, whoa, how is that going to affect Virta business? Is that going to be good or bad? And so the paradox is that I don't think there's a rule book to say like that is completely going to change your business. AI is, well, it's already here, but particularly large language models. Like, how do you know when you actually have to pivot or fundamentally change something? I don't think there's a rule book for that. So that's sort of the paradox of like, if you have one thing that's working, don't change anything. Just scale, execute, and simplify. In fact, kill projects, kill features, eliminate distractions. But then if you're not in the right place, then obviously you have to make a radical change or shift. And I wish I could tell, like, this is how you kind of know it. But that is the founders and the CEO's job, because nobody else in the organization has the courage to say, I don't know, we have a bunch of people, we need to replace them with AI. Like nobody else will be able to do that or will do that. It's only the founder or a founder can pull something like that off, is in my opinion.
Yeah. When I look at the way that you have balanced building your companies with the work, competing as an Ironman and the world record, it seems that you may have like obsessive tendencies in terms of going like all in on something. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
and so my question is, to succeed in a difficult market like healthcare and as a founder requires a certain obsession. And so I'm just wondering if you could sort of talk about that nature, how obsessive a founder needs to be, and some of the lessons you've learned along the way with balancing that obsession with taking care of yourself, with having a family. Like obviously that obsession is necessary. You can't be half in, half out and succeed in this business. So kind of what have you learned?
To build a successful growth company is like winning gold medal in Olympic Games. You have to be all in. Like it is like 90% of your life. And so you wouldn't ask, Olympic athlete who's got Olympic finals tomorrow, like, are you gonna go party tonight? Or did you just eat junk food for the last week? Or no, they are 100% in. In fact, they've been in for minimum probably a decade, but last 4 years between Olympic Games and then the day before the final. There is no distraction. They aren't going to go to their kid's birthday party. It's nothing. That's the only way you can win Olympic gold. I'm absolutely convinced. Pretty much anything in life, if you want to achieve extraordinary results, there is no balance. Like you have to be all in if you want to deliver extraordinary results. I just don't. And so, okay, so that's kind of my one statement. The second one is, in order to do that, and do it in an enjoyable way, and to do it in a way that you want to do it. I've been entrepreneurial since 2000, and I had about 3 years off between those 2 years at Stanford and one. So 21 years I've been a founder operator. There's no way you can do something for 21 years unless you love it. Like you actually enjoy. Or talk to Michael Phelps as a swimmer, or I don't know which athletes you follow. It is crazy hard work to get to the Olympic gold level. You must enjoy it at some level. It has to be some sort of obsession with the training, you love it. So that's the second thing I would say, that whatever company you start, whatever the mission is, whatever, like you kind of have to fall in love irrefutably, so, unquestionably. There has to be something where like, I love this domain, I love reading this stuff on a Saturday night, afternoon on the beach or whatever. Otherwise, you just cannot sustain it for decades. And by the way, if you're successful, you're going to be doing it for a decade. If it fails in 12 months, well, too bad. Then that's the only option when you only do it for a year. So that's the second thing I say. And then I'll say third thing before you interrupt after the next question. That said, we can talk about how do you sustain sort of physical, mental, emotional, and other things. But one thing I will say that's been hugely helpful for me is, in terms of sustaining and keeping my sanity, is developing multiple identities in your brain. What do I mean by that? You could be anything, but you could be a spouse, you could be a parent. For me, it's spouse, parent, athlete, and entrepreneur. I say athlete because when I do sports, first of all, that's my own kind of little bubble. I can train, I can do races, and the people I hang out with, the people I might go for a bike ride with, most of them could not care less what I do professionally or what's my title, or maybe they don't even know what I do. That is incredibly helpful because inevitably things will go sideways, and your day at the office or your week at the office, your quarter at the is horrible, is stressful, you're running out of cash. Your investor's about to fire you. Your best VPs are leaving. Like everything goes to hell. And this happens all the time, literally. If the only thing you have is your company, and in your brain that becomes 99% of your identity, it's nearly impossible to sustain that emotionally. And I'm knock on wood, I've been doing this for 21 years, never touched a single antidepressant, never cracked, never taken time off from work for emotional distress reasons. And maybe it happens this afternoon now that I mentioned this, but I think one of the reasons is I've taken care of myself physically, mentally, but then also I've cultivated multiple identities. So when one thing goes to hell at work, I have like, okay, well, at least I can be a spouse or parent and do an okay job. And I am an athlete, maybe have a race this weekend, and that's my own bubble. And it's incredibly refreshing and gives like a stable foundation where if one thing is sort of deteriorating, maybe 50% or 25% of the foundation is still there. Now, obviously, those are all thoughts in the brain. So if you're a superstar meditator, maybe you just laugh about this and say like, you know, I'll just laugh about everything. But it is tough when you're running a company and everything goes to hell and you're on the cover of some magazine as the worst CEO of the decade. Like, good luck with that.
Yeah. Yeah, you have two children, correct? And they're
Two, yeah.
on the younger side.
Yeah, 7 and 9.
7
Yeah.
and 9. How has being the father of two girls, 7 and 9, shaped the way that you lead Virta? Has it changed it at all?
I think there's even more authenticity in what I do, meaning like, I don't think I've ever sort of faked it in, but now it's like, I'm just the same equally silly or equally serious person, quote unquote, at the office and at home. So I think that's one, that it has brought even more authenticity and, you know, having the kids, because they also call you BS, like it's like, and they don't care. They just,
Yeah.
I'm their dad, as bad or as good as I am. They don't care what I do.
They really don't care about the titles. If anybody doesn't care, the girls don't care.
It's very helpful. And so that's one. The second thing is, I think, I mean, I'm prone to anxiety in a positive sense. I think just my wiring, like I do, like my brain thinks too many things like what could go wrong. So I'm conscious of that. But I think having the kids gives even more perspective. So I feel like I have less time, but I'm more relaxed. It's kind of like it gives you perspective. It's like, seriously, like this thing at work, it isn't that big of a deal. So I think it has calm me and give an even more perspective. So I'm less stressed, I guess I should say, at work. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is the one currency we all have the same amount. I'm 100% sure. Yeah, I'm very sure. Is time. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But what's different is the exchange rate. So the same currency exchange rate. So when you don't have kids, the exchange rate is very different. It's kind of like you can always stretch to Sunday or Saturday or every evening, whatever. In fact, I had to cancel a conference this week because I realized that I just cannot be gone. And so that's one thing. I'm very conscious of my time allocation, particular travel, being away from home, who I meet, like network events, all this. They're pretty much out the window unless they are very like strategic, important events. So lots of positive things, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, doing that kind of vetting is probably net positive
Yeah.
to only go to the networking events that are really on point for you.
Yeah.
We're going to try to get to a couple questions in a little bit more of a lightning round. Amy Cohn from Joy Days, why don't you ask your question? We'll try to get to maybe a couple more after that.
First of all, holy shit, you're touching on so many things here that are just so good. I know all of us are like, oh. And now the segue actually for what you were just talking about. So my company is a food company. We are recreating nostalgic snacks that don't spike your blood sugar. And so we pioneered a new snacking section in Walmart in the diabetes aisle. So we're competing with Glucerna and a more modern brand. And the crossroads that I'm at is exactly just what you just said about the pace. So my background is in tech, and I've entered into this CPG world, which is giving something that is a first step habit change to people with diabetes. And we're at the precipice of the integration of food as medicine and what that actually means. And so I was going to ask you all about where you thought food as medicine is going to go, but now I'm like, oof, considering what you just said about dealing with antiquated industries, where do you start to pivot and deal with when you start to see all of these different hurdles? Because we're distributed in other grocery stores, CPG is slow. And so I'm trying to think through where are the biggest points of scale and where do we think the evolution of food as medicine might end up going in terms of the business strategy here.
Yeah. Again, I love metabolic health, diabetes again there. And I will try to make this more lightning, so pretty fast. But believe it or not, I started a packaged food company with my wife right before the role. And the goal was to recreate all the crunchy, high carbohydrate, high sugar food categories, such as cereal, with products that don't increase your blood sugar. That was the idea, 2014. And now we have Magic Spoon and others. We actually kind of stopped it because then I started Virta, but that's what we're doing. So I actually have some experience. So I'm going to throw 2 or 3 things very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And obviously we failed or I gave up and decided to do something else. But so a couple of things. One, when it relates to food, it's kind of like Tesla electric vehicles. Unfortunately, you have to make it feel like it tastes like cookie dough, meaning like the only way to sell electric vehicles was to make it sexy and fast, where the electric was the afterthought. I think the same thing in food. Anything that's healthy, unless it's like injected into your vein by a doctor, it has to be tasting as good or better than what already exists. So that was one of my lessons. Second thing is food is different from tech. So like networking, capital, you need like a whole expertise in there to be able to scale and not lose all your cash. It's very complicated, yada, yada, yada. So there's that, the second one. And then the third one, I would say, definitely carefully think about the go-to-market, because there's the companies that supply food for hospitals and others. It's a whole getting into that channel, like what Abbott's may be doing and a couple of others, versus a grocery store. Sounds like you're in a grocery store, but I would think carefully where you want to play. The grocery store is certainly 1,000 times easier than getting into these channels that are dominated by two or three companies. And then one more thing I would mention, if your strategy is retail versus like a direct-to-consumer brand and online and so forth, it is so important what's the peer set, like where the food is. Is it the fridge or freezer or medical aisle or by the cashier counter? Like that's kind of like part of the go-to market that I would think very, very carefully, because it's all about foot traffic and where people find it. I don't know. There's a couple of random thoughts there, but I can empathize, and it's not easy. It's very hard. And in the packaged food, oh my God. But I love that you're doing it, and I think there is a lot of opportunity, because basically all the diabetes foods that you can buy online make you diabetic.
No, I mean, it's not,
bullshit.
we recreated Chips Ahoy. So that taste, there's an audience. And I think exactly like what you said.
Sami, during our pre-call, you said to me that being busy has nothing to do with being successful. And it just reminded me of that because I saw Richard Hambury's question here from Sana. So Richard, why don't you come off of mute and ask your question?
Yeah, my question is around what are your most important daily and weekly or monthly or quarterly planning rituals?
I do think to some extent, or large extent, for the company, it obviously needs to evolve as the company grows. Because initially it's kind of like, if we don't find product market fit, like everything goes down the toilet. So you're just very focused on that sort of one thing and iterating and meeting with clients and stuff like that. So, and then once you have operations, you can have like systematic planning. But so anyway, so I just leave that aside, that there's a little bit of a change, like very, very early. Sometimes it's like, we just need the one thing. And maybe as a founder, it's like, okay, if I don't get the funding, we're going to go out of it. So then it's just all about the funding. There's no need for planning, whatever. That aside, I'll mention personally what I do. I'm a little bit of a planner. Maybe it's not a surprise, but I created a 15-year plan for myself that I initially created in 2013. I guess, it's still. And then I updated once a year. There's sort of areas of life that I want to focus on, what I want to accomplish, areas of life, time allocation, what I want to accomplish. And then I'll look at it every Sunday evening. Like, okay, am I like allocating time? So that's kind of my personal. And then as that relates to work, I define my to-do Sunday evening for the next week. And we have a Slack channel for the whole company. It's an optional, where you post the top 2 things you accomplished last week and the top 2 to 4 things that you focus on this week. My whole company can go there and see the last 8 years of history. Every single week I posted, I'm focused on these 3 things this week. Last year I accomplished these. So the weekly ritual, and then I tie them obviously to my personal objectives for that quarter and that year. Now, obviously there's confidential things, like if I'm doing fundraising, I don't talk about that. If I need to make a big reorg or fire someone or something, like I might put in like, planning the organization for the future or whatever, like, but those are some of my rituals. And then I literally have an ASCII file, a text file, where on Sunday, I list the things I said I would do, and I put in there. And then outside of my meetings, I operate based on the to-do list. And I don't take any incoming calls. I only take texts. So I have a to-do list on this text file. That's my kind of simple personal operating structure.
We'll have to have a whole. Sorry, we have to have a whole separate hour to talk about your training regimen.
Yeah, and then I have a lot of routine. Like it's like there was famous Mark Zuckerberg only wears black t-shirts or whatever. He has 15 of them and 15 jeans. Like I actually am a believer on that. Like I have a lot of things that I just go autopilot. The morning I wake up, I do certain things. I always do my workouts in the morning. Like I don't negotiate with myself. I just have a lot of routines, not too much, but I have certain routines. They just happen every single day. And by the way, you look back a year or 2 later, and if you've done, I don't know, you meditate 10 minutes a day, like that's a lot of practice for your brain. If you do 10 times 365 days a year, a couple of years. So routines are big. Company planning, we operate very simple. We did this at Trulia. We call them the slingshot meetings. Now we call them adaptation at Virta, but it's basically a quarterly cycle. It's a quarterly planning cycle. And then we try to be as execution focused as possible for the quarter. And then once a year, we set 2 to 4 objectives for the year. And now that we're at the scale where like hundreds of millions are coming in and out every year, obviously we have a pretty solid budgeting process. every fall that ties into the 4 objectives. But the basic cadence for the company is quarterly planning cycle. And then it sort of culminates as a entire company tunes in for 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours, where key teams present what did we do last quarter, and then what are we doing this quarter. And then we have certain KPIs, metrics that everybody can access on a day-to-day basis. That's sort of the basic thing. But I think I call it the company operating system. Once you're over the initial product market fit, like the one thing that you really have to, it's kind of binary, it's either going to work out or not. I think you want to introduce this operating system pretty soon. I think I introduced it end of 2015. So I've been doing it for 9 years.
That's awesome. You covered a lot of territory there. We're going to have a recording of this available. We can dissect some of those lessons learned later. I want to close on a little bit of a philosophical note, Sami. You mentioned meditating 10 minutes a day, kind of building in this practice, really understanding yourself better. I was moved hearing a story from an interview that you gave about how the time right after Trulia sold was like a low period for you, a liquidity event that a lot of founders would really sort of aspire to, resulted in maybe a tough time mentally. It maybe made you think differently. It gave you a new perspective on money and its ability to sort of bring about, joy and fulfillment. And I think, in terms of just thinking about building your company and keeping that passion alive and why you're driving forward, I wonder if you could just share a little bit about that and what you learned from that experience.
Yeah, I think you're referencing like when Trulia went public and I had left my operational role. So I was on the board, but I didn't have a day job. So yeah, maybe I'll quickly touch the money piece as you mentioned, but that actually wasn't the biggest lesson. So I grew up on a farm in Finland. My parents didn't even go to high school. That's very like humble beginning. Like there was no money. Like we couldn't fly an airplane, all 4 of the family at the same time because we couldn't afford. So it was me and my dad 1 year and the next year. Like that was like it was fun. So why do I mention that? I mentioned that like we had nothing really extra, but I've never felt like I've been poor or I haven't had. I've just been happy with very, very, very limited things. And then Trulia went public, obviously, created more wealth than I needed for food and for housing. It was an interesting moment for me to realize that it actually did not change anything. And for a moment, I was like, well, now I'm rich. I've got money. Like, how I'm going to be a different person. Like, how am I going to be different? And luckily, I got over it very quickly. And I was married, so I didn't go to Vegas and, start doing stupid shit. So if anyone thinks like money is going to change you anything, it probably shouldn't. So I realized very quickly that it should change nothing. I should go back to what I was doing and what actually made me happy, which for me is obviously this family and friends, but then using my creativity to create something that helps other people. So that was kind of the money piece. And, now obviously everyone says yes to money rather than no, but like I've never really seen that as a thing worthy of sacrificing everything. And then, if you succeed with your company, obviously there's a reward. So that's one piece. The second piece was the much bigger issue for me. I felt like I was always this kind of happy person, and I felt like I never had a job. I was always doing something that's interesting and exciting. And then I suddenly did not have anything, like nothing. So I didn't have the next carrot or cookie or whatever, probably not cookie, carrot, in front of my nose. And I became incredibly unhappy and anxious. Like it was crazy. We were living in New York, money in the bank, happily married, no kids. I was like, yeah, it's the best time in my life. Like I can do anything. I was so anxious and unhappy about everything, little things like, like washing machine doesn't work. It was a horrible moment. I was scared. In my 30s, I was like, wow, I may have another 60 years of this. Like, I don't know if I'm going to get through life. Like, what is going on? I've always been so happy. And the one realization for me was, I've trained every muscle in my body as an athlete for, 20 years. I've also trained my brain in terms of knowledge with schools and such. But I had never understood how my mind works. Like literally, when I was alone with my mind, and there wasn't distractions and the next thing to do, I was literally going crazy. And so what did I get out of that? So I realized that, there is a way to understand your mind, train your mind, not in a knowledge going to school way, but like understanding that your mind has a life of its own. And if it's your master, you've fucked. And so what I ended up doing was I went to a 10-day silent meditation retreat. And then that sort of started basically a 10-day daily meditation habit. So that was one thing, like understanding your mind. And when you're busy and you're just chasing the next thing, it's easy to not realize that. And it's no surprise, like Olympic athletes, they win Olympic gold, then they retire. And the next thing they are addicted to alcohol or whatnot. It's no surprise. So this happens to a lot of people. And you chase, then you catch it, then you stop and you go crazy. That basically happened to me in my 30s. Luckily, I didn't go crazy. So that was one thing. And then once I understood my mind a little bit better, then I had this question of, okay, so what do I do? What to do? Like, here we are on this little planet, lucky to be alive, like how to allocate lifetime. And I came back to this entrepreneurship, which is I have some gifts, some creativity, some skills. If I can use these skills to create something, I love it. And if I can create something that helps other people, like that's the best thing. And so that's kind of why I'm back doing it, no matter how hard it is. So
I love it. I think that's a beautiful note to end on. We're lucky to be alive. Let's use our creative energies to make the world a better place. I know so many of people on this call are doing just that. And Sami, your words today were just a shot of adrenaline, an encouragement, a lot of wisdom to kind of keep pushing forward. And so I know I speak for everybody in thanking you for your time, your openness and authenticity in sharing with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Logan and team. Stay at it. You're lucky. You are all very privileged that you're actually building companies. So make most out of it.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Sami.
Thanks, Logan. And thanks for your support for Virta as well. Startup Health. You guys rock.
Thanks for listening to Startup Health Now. We'll be back again with another episode next week.